Today, I want to talk about dating ancient zodiacs, both Egyptian and non-Egyptian. However, I will begin with the Egyptian ones, as that's where we started, and Egyptian zodiacs represent the most classic and ancient example of astronomical dating. What is a zodiac? In this illustration, we have the solar system. The Sun is at the center, and around it, there are planets represented as little white circles, with a small black circle representing Earth. The planets and Earth also revolve around the Sun in elliptical, approximately circular orbits, which all lie approximately in the same plane. All these orbits, although they are not perfect circles, they are ellipses, but close to being circular, they all lie in the same plane. What does this imply? It means that if we, from Earth, this black point, look at any planet, it will be visible to us among the stars on this circle. It will be at some point on that circle. The stars are very far away, and we can consider them to be located on a sphere of a large radius, which astronomers call the sphere of fixed stars. Of course, the stars are at different distances from Earth, but when we look at them, we can just as well imagine that they are all at the same distance, but a very large one. This doesn't change our overall perspective. When we look at them, we cannot estimate the distance to them, and they appear to us as a spherical celestial vault. This is what astronomers call the sphere of fixed stars. In reality, they are at different distances, but for simplicity, we will assume they are at the same, albeit a very large distance. This is the general picture that appears to an earthly observer. The sphere of fixed stars, of course, rotates because the Earth rotates, but relative to each other, the stars do not shift. And if they do shift, these are what we call the proper motions of stars. And these shifts are so small that they were only noticed over centuries and with good astronomical instruments. Everyday observation with the naked eye usually cannot show their relative shifts. Stars appear to us as fixed relative to each other, which is why they are called fixed stars. Although, of course, this sphere, as a whole, rotates due to the Earth's rotation, the stars remain in the same positions relative to each other. Planets also appear to us to be situated on the same sphere. This is because when we look at them from Earth, let's say we're looking at a planet like Venus, it appears to be among these stars. Although it is, of course, much closer, we don't perceive the distance, so it seems to be on the same sphere. Unlike all the other stars, due to the Earth's rotation around the Sun and the rotation of all planets around the Sun, the line of sight from Earth to a planet will intersect the sphere of fixed stars in different places. In other words, the planet also appears to us as a shining point, just like the stars. But unlike the stars, this shining point will move among the fixed stars. It will always move along the same circle, which represents the intersection of the plane in which the planets revolve around the Sun and the sphere of fixed stars. Ancient astronomers perceived the sky as a crystal sphere to which the fixed stars, points of light that do not move relative to each other, were attached. Some were attached, and some were free and moved among the others. This was observed long ago, and that's why these stars were called wandering stars or planets. The word planet means wanderer or wandering star. So, among these shining points, luminaries, there are wanderers. Initially, people didn't understand that stars are far away, and planets are closer, so they thought that the planets were the ones in motion. So, all these moving stars or planets move along the same celestial path, namely, along this circle. Today, it's called the ecliptic, but in ancient times, it was called the zodiac and was marked out. To remember, people imagined the fixed stars along this path in the form of pictures. This path was divided into segments, and they mentally arranged the fixed stars in these segments as images, resulting in 12 zodiacal constellations located in the vicinity of the zodiac, this celestial path. Gemini, Cancer, Leo, and so on. These are the 12 constellations. Don't confuse them with modern astrology, with modern signs. I'll talk about them later. That's something else altogether. Here, I'm specifically talking about constellations, groups of stars along the zodiac, along the ecliptic, transformed by human imagination into certain figures. Among these stars, planets or wandering stars move, and thus they transition from one sector, from one constellation to another. Astronomers noticed this. For example, when we look from Earth at Venus, where is it? In Gemini. And where is Mercury? In Taurus, or on the border of Taurus. The combination of planets, where each planet is located in which constellation, is called a horoscope. The Sun itself is also such a moving luminary. That is, we look at the Sun and see that it is somewhere among these stars. And the Moon too. It's not drawn here. It revolves around the Earth, but it is also approximately in the same plane, although slightly, just a little bit deviates from it. That is, the Moon swings around the ecliptic, around the zodiac, but doesn't stray far from it. So, when we look at the Moon, it also appears to us somewhere in one of the zodiacal constellations. These zodiacal constellations are wide. Therefore, it doesn't stray from them, and it is always in one of them. Of course, when we look at the Sun, we don't see stars, but we can look at the evening and morning sky and imagine where the Sun has set, where it has descended. We see when and which stars appeared in the sky, although the Sun is not among them. Let's say we don't see these stars because we still see the Sun. When the Sun has already set, and we no longer see it, but we see the stars that have appeared on the horizon, and then at some other time of the year, we will see these stars together with those in which the Sun was. We remember the picture and what the fixed stars look like. So, seeing the part of the zodiac that appeared after the Sun set below the horizon, we can imagine exactly in which part of this constellation or neighboring one the Sun is located. People have learned to do this through observation. Thus, it turns out that the celestial dome, divided into zodiacal constellations, is like heavenly divine clock on which time can be marked by the positions of the planet hands. There are 7 planets in total, including the Sun and the Moon. I'll emphasize once again that in this system, the Sun and the Moon are also considered the same as other planets, the same moving luminaries among the fixed stars. Today, of course, we don't call the Sun and the Moon planets, but the ancients did. And here, when we talk about horoscopes, we'll have to call them planets too. That's why we call them ancient planets. Both the real planets, the Sun, and the Moon, all of them are ancient planets. Some planets that are known today, Uranus, Neptune, were not classified as planets because they simply weren't visible to the naked eye. We don't consider them here. We only consider those that could be seen with the eye, what the ancient astronomer could see. So, to the ancient man, it seemed that on this crystal sphere of fixed stars, to which these fixed luminaries are attached, and which as a whole rotates around the Earth, there is a path along which 7, as it were, clock hands, 7 shining stars move. Because the Earth rotates uniformly, approximately in a circle. And these 7 hands, moving across the sky, were used by the ancients to record dates, those directed towards eternity for descendants, marked on the celestial divine clock. This is an ancient science, originating from Egypt. Here's an example of a horoscope. What is a horoscope? It's a list. The Sun, for example, is there, Venus is there, Mercury is there. But not just any list, not any horoscope can appear in the sky. For example, let's go back again, see? We look at Mercury and look at the Sun, and even from this picture, we see that the angle between the Sun and Mercury cannot be arbitrary. It cannot be greater than the angle between the direction to the Sun and the tangent to the orbit of Mercury. The same goes for another inner planet, Venus. It cannot be arbitrary. The angle between the Sun and Venus cannot exceed about 40 degrees. Between the Sun and Mercury, I don't remember now, it's even less. Therefore, from the perspective of an Earth observer, this means that Venus and Mercury are always near the Sun. They go around, past the Sun. Then, conversely, they press back against the Sun, move away from the Sun in the other direction, then press against the Sun again. And what does that mean? It means that they are visible either on the morning horizon or the evening horizon, and they are not visible in the middle of the night, because midnight means that we are on the other side of the Earth from the Sun, which is very deep below the horizon, and we are looking in that direction. And in that direction, neither Mercury nor Venus can be, because they are not far from the Sun. Their angular distance is not very large. Subsequently, in the middle of the night, we cannot see either Mercury or Venus. We can only see them in the morning or evening. Mercury is visible only early in the morning or early in the evening, and Venus is visible for a longer time, but still not in the middle of the night. So, these two planets are called morning or evening stars, and ancient astronomers even initially thought that they were two different planets. That is, Venus appears, it is visible, then it disappears because it approaches the Sun and is eclipsed by it. When it is, for example, located here.
Sorry, your mouse is not visible, as you are showing it on your screen.
You can't see my mouse?
No, it's not visible.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind, then I won't even use it. Here's Venus, and here's Mercury. The smallest circle around the Sun is Mercury. The next one is Venus, and the next black one is Earth. Further on are the outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. 2 of them are drawn here, but there should be 3, it's just not drawn. The inner planets are those that revolve in smaller circles, Venus and Mercury. And from this picture, it's already evident that Mercury runs along the smallest circle and sometimes ends up on a line between Earth and the Sun. Then it is not visible because the Sun eclipses it. We can only see it along with the Sun, and the Sun eclipses it. Therefore, from the perspective of an Earth observer, Mercury appears in the morning on the morning horizon, then disappears, meaning it is no longer visible. It appears in the sky only during the day, but during the day, it is not visible with the Sun. Then it appears on the other side of the Sun, on the evening horizon. then disappears again, then appears after some time on the morning horizon. That's why the ancients thought that these were two wandering stars, two planets. One appears in the morning, then disappears, perishes, dies, and then another one is born. The evening one, it lives for a while, then it perishes, then the morning one is born again. That's how they viewed Mercury and Venus. It wasn't immediately understood that it's the same planet, that it doesn't perish, doesn't die, but simply moves behind the sun. Therefore, ancient Egyptian symbolism attributes a dual nature to Venus and Mercury. Duality or necessarily two figures, the morning and evening guys. The other planets are visible all night. Yes, of course, they occasionally hide behind the sun. But overall, their path is well traceable, and the fact that they sometimes disappear behind the sun was clear to ancient observers that it's the same star. It went behind the sun, disappeared from view, and then emerged again. They weren't depicted with dual symbolism. This is also important. This means that not just any horoscope can appear. That is, if the sun is in a certain constellation, then Mercury must be in this or neighboring constellations, and Venus in this one, in neighboring ones, maybe one further, but not beyond. If a non-astronomer just randomly comes up with a horoscope, then he would likely violate these laws. That is, thanks to Venus and Mercury, which do not stray far from the sun, the horoscope cannot be arbitrary. In Egyptian zodiacs, planets moving among the fixed stars were depicted as wayfarers. The symbol of a wayfarer emphasizes that it is not a fixed star, but a planet, a star that moves. Sometimes a little star was drawn above the head, a sign of visibility. How are Egyptian zodiacs structured? Egyptian zodiacs typically feature the figure of the goddess Nut, representing the sky. This sky is depicted in the form of a woman who is arched, and we see her arched figure on which the stars are placed. Essentially, it's the crystal celestial dome. In European tradition, it's a crystal sphere, while in Egyptian tradition, it's a woman with an elongated body arched above the earth. This figure is characteristic and shows that here is the zodiac. This is an example of an Egyptian zodiac. Sometimes two goddesses Nut are drawn, one on each half of the zodiac. Here are two goddesses. Often, Egyptian zodiacs are depicted in this form. This is a round zodiac. Here, the goddess Nut is depicted on the side. On the left is the depiction of the round zodiac from the description of Egypt. This is the zodiac of Osiris, which is also the zodiac of Christ. It contains the date of Easter before the crucifixion of Christ. Because, in reality, it was a Jewish Easter, Passover, not after, but before the crucifixion of Christ. This is detailed in our books. Usually, it is thought that Christ was crucified on Friday, and Passover was on Saturday. Because this Saturday was called the Great Saturday. But the Great Saturday does not mean that it is the first day of Passover. In fact, Passover began on Tuesday, and Saturday was just the Sabbath of Passover. Passover was celebrated for 7 days. Christ was crucified on Friday, and Passover began on Tuesday. By the way, that's why Christ celebrated Passover on Thursday. The Last Supper was the celebration of Passover. He had already celebrated Passover, and he was crucified afterward. This is the Easter zodiac of the year 1185. You see, the goddess Nut is depicted next to the zodiac. Since it is round, she does not surround it by bending, but is depicted next to it, also with stretched legs and arms. This is, of course, an Egyptian picture. Here, they dressed her in a dress. In the original, she is naked. Here is the Dendera temple, where the zodiac of Osiris is located. The temple is dedicated to the Virgin Mary. There are two zodiacs there. One is the zodiac of Christ, and the other is the rectangular zodiac. It is also dedicated to some event from the era of Christ. The year 1185 is the crucifixion, the Jewish Passover before the crucifixion. The rectangular zodiac contains the year 1168. This is the date of some event from the life of Christ. We don't exactly know which event. This temple has a flat roof, and you can climb onto it. On this roof stands a chapel. That is, a building on a building. In this chapel is the round zodiac. Here it is. This is its photograph. It was taken in Egypt. This is an authentic image of the goddess Nut. Everything next to it is authentic, but the zodiac itself was broken. You see, it's black. It was torn out and eventually transported to the Louvre. By the way, it was torn out by a Russian Egyptologist who tried to take it to St. Petersburg. But the cargo was intercepted and transported to the Louvre. These are empty cartouches located on the sides of this goddess. They are empty, but in the description of Egypt, some hieroglyphs were drawn on them, although they never existed. There is no trace of them at all. However, in the first edition of the description, some hieroglyphs were mistakenly placed in these cartouches. Champollion, looking at this edition, dated this zodiac. He was not looking at the original, not at the actual image, but at the edition of the description, where hieroglyphs were mistakenly placed in these cartouches. Looking at these hieroglyphs, which actually do not exist, he dated this zodiac to the 1st century AD. After this, it was discovered that there were no hieroglyphs, that it was a mistake. They never existed, and there are not even any traces of erasure. They are just empty. Despite this, Champollion's dating, based on the empty cartouches and erroneous hieroglyphs that someone inserted there from an unknown source, is still accepted by historians. If you open an encyclopedia, this is the dating that will be given, which Champollion invented, looking at erroneous inscriptions published in the description, which actually do not exist. This is an example of how historians never admit their mistakes. They could have said, yes, Champollion was wrong, and dated it differently. Of course, they can redetermine it in a different way, but the result will be exactly the same. They cannot achieve anything different. This is the rectangular zodiac in the Dendera temple as well, but in the main temple. The previous one is in the chapel on the roof of the temple, and this one is large, on the ceiling of the main temple. This is the Valley of the Kings. There are many pharaohs' burials, and in some of these burials, on the vaults of the burial chamber, there is a zodiac with the date of either death or the 40th day, but connected with the pharaoh's death, his departure to the afterlife. This was also done to transmit this date to eternity. This is Ramesses VII, year 1182. This is what it looks like. The tomb is empty. There is a hole there, a rather primitive ancient painted sarcophagus. The zodiac on the ceiling is dated 1182. And this is the zodiac of Ramesses VI, a huge tomb. I'll show it again. You see, such a large entrance. They don't let people in. They haven't let anyone in for a long time, and still don't. But we were there. For this, we obtained special permission in Cairo. They don't let people in without permit. There is a huge zodiac there. The dating of this zodiac can be calculated, although ambiguously. I will show it in the table later. Two dates have been calculated for it, the 13th century and the 16th. But most likely, the authentic date is the 13th century. Ramesses IV. Also, a huge tomb with an enormous sarcophagus. Also there is a zodiac.
This is the 15th century, I think, 1425.
We'll see in the table later. This is a fragment of the zodiac of Ramesses IV. There are 4 figures, 4 male planets, all bearded. I will show later how it is deciphered. This is the zodiac of Seti I. Year 1206. The very beginning of the 13th century. There are 2 possible dates. The one located where the rest of the dates accumulate and therefore more probable is 1206. By the way, this is the mummy of Pharaoh Seti I, who was buried in this tomb. This is the zodiac and the temple of Esna. There is a city called Esna, and there is a huge zodiac on the ceiling that can also be dated. This is the actual temple. As you can see, it is now standing in a pit. The city's current ground level is marked here. The pit is about 15 meters deep. Since the time it stood on the ground level has risen. Sand from the desert accumulates there. That's why the ground level rises very quickly. The dating of this zodiac is the beginning of the 15th century. Now let's talk about how to date zodiacs and, in general, the history of this question. The question of dating specifically Egyptian zodiacs has a long history. Let's start with them. The astronomical nature of Egyptian zodiacs was immediately noticed. It is quite obvious. Egyptologists arrived there at the very end of the 18th century, at the beginning of the 19th, with Napoleon. The Napoleon's campaign was in 1799. Maybe not the Egyptologists themselves, but artists and scholars got there. They sketched everything and started studying it in Europe. As soon as they got there, it became clear that some dates were recorded here using the arrangement of planets in constellations, that is, using zodiacs. Attempts to date them immediately began. The famous Egyptologist Brooks worked on this with astronomers of his time. They tried to twist the dates. That is, how did they date? Based on their considerations, they proposed a range to astronomers in which they needed a date. Astronomers tried to calculate what date in the given historical range corresponds to the images in the zodiac. But they never succeeded. Everything turned out poorly, not as drawn. Therefore, with this dating they had a lot of trouble. It turned out badly until Morozov took it up. It was at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th, when Morozov began dating Egyptian zodiacs, but he did not limit himself to the intervals set by historians. Instead, he immediately searched over a large interval and found good solutions, at least much better than those proposed by historians. After that, historians, without referring to Morozov and pretending they hadn't read Morozov, although they did, completely abandoned this occupation, realizing that their dates were worse but Morozov's dates did not suit them. They abandoned these activities and started saying that there were no dates recorded in these zodiacs, that these were just fantasies, and they shouldn't be dated, although they themselves had been doing this for 100 years. There are objective problems and subjective ones, or at least those related to the Scaligerian chronology, which they do not want to change. Therefore, it is understandable why they did not seek solutions over large intervals. But there are also objective problems that Morozov faced, related to the dating of zodiacs. Firstly, there are always more than 7 figures with staffs, many more. So, they had to choose some figures, call them planets, and discard others, saying that these are just some deities, and we don't pay attention to these figures, but we do to these. This was a kind of arbitrariness. Then, not all planetary figures could be unambiguously identified. Some were clear, with symbolism that was understood unequivocally, such as Saturn, for example, and Venus, although Egyptologists managed to confuse Venus with Mercury. Some could be identified more or less unambiguously, but not all. Some were depicted in a way that wasn't always clear which planet it represented. Another problem arises with pseudo-periods. That is, a certain horoscope appears in the sky with certain constellations and planets, but in reality, this horoscope will reappear, and then again. These occurrences are distributed unevenly over the axis of time. It's not as if a horoscope appears, and then after thousands of years, it appears again. No, if a certain horoscope appears, then after a few hundred years it may approximately repeat, then again after a few hundred years, but with less precision, and then it disappears. Horoscopes in the sky appear in such series. Not all horoscopes behave this way, but if one appears, it usually reappears. There are some that only appear once and then not again for thousands of years. Many horoscopes appear in such series with pseudo-periods. What does pseudo-period mean? It means that it appears, then reappears approximately, then even more approximately, and then disappears. In other words, over this period, it appears several times, and then disappears. Therefore, when there's just one horoscope, it is generally a poor dating method. It's ambiguous. This means that for this horoscope, there will be another solution after a few hundred years. If this is meant for future generations, if it's directed towards eternity, it's not very reliable. Yes, there are horoscopes that obviously have only one solution, and an experienced astronomer can distinguish these. But it's not always so lucky that exactly the date to be immortalized is captured by a horoscope that knowingly won't repeat for thousands of years. Even if astronomers understand this, it doesn't work out. There's no such horoscope. They need to record not just any date but specifically this famous one. The horoscope of a pharaoh's death doesn't have to be one that only repeats after many thousands of years. No, it can have a pseudo-period, and usually, it does. Consequently, ancient astronomers, who were quite experienced in this matter, understood this and must have done something about it. But historians, including Morozov, didn't attach importance to this. They believed that there was only one horoscope in the zodiac, and that's it. Such an approach, where there's only one horoscope in the zodiac, and everything else is just some religious images, is unlikely to be correct. Firstly, for the reasons listed here, there are more figures, and pseudo-periods arise, leading to unreliability and ambiguity. Therefore, one should proceed with the assumption that astronomers were, after all, intelligent, given the complexity of the drawings. Because it was immediately noticed, not only by Morozov but also by others, that the laws of horoscopes are not violated.
Venus and Mercury are always close to the Sun.
If these were just random images, if some artist was drawing without knowing astronomy, he couldn't have drawn it like that. All horoscopes are astronomically well crafted. Therefore, if we talk about attempts at dating, the first period is when astronomers, along with Egyptologists, tried to engage in this. Here are listed the names of astronomers and Egyptologists who were involved in this. They sincerely tried to date them. Well, sincerely within the framework of their chronological ideas. It didn't go well for them. Then Morozov came and showed that he had much better dates and much better interpretations, much more natural ones. But the dates turned out to be late, not suitable for Egyptologists. In other words, Egyptologists realized that if they abandon their chronology, much better dates emerge. These dates can be criticized, but at least the Egyptologists themselves have much worse dates. So, they immediately claimed that no, these are not dates. Don't pay attention. These are just pictures. We've been working on this for 120 years. We just didn't fully understand it, but now we finally realized that there are no dates, and we were doing all this in vain. That's what they did when they looked at Morozov's work. But the Morozov's work was continued by Kellen Denisenko, Tatiana Fomenko, also in the spirit of Morozov's approach. That is, we look at the zodiac, think about how to interpret it, propose an interpretation through examination and various speculative reasoning. We try to offer the correct interpretation, carry out the calculation and find the date. Starting from 2002, Anatoly Fomenko and I took up this issue and proposed a different approach, which I will now tell you about. Our approach was that one shouldn't propose an interpretation but calculate it. Calculating the interpretation can be done by trying out all possible variants of this interpretation. Distinguishing the correct variant from the incorrect one is possible only if these ancient astronomers provided us with the necessary information for it. That is, if they added some additional astronomical conditions to the zodiac. Moreover, they had to add quite a lot of these conditions, so that incorrect interpretations would not lead to consistent dates. It is necessary to simultaneously satisfy both the horoscope and these conditions. This is known from the theory of data communication. If you want to transmit a signal reliably, it must be redundant. The more it is redundant, the more reliably you can correct errors and some inadequacies. And it turned out that indeed, in Egyptian zodiacs, and not only in Egyptian ones, there is additional information that allows not to propose a decoding but to calculate it by trying out all possible decodings. And here, of course, manual calculations, even with the help of modern astronomical programs, were not suitable anymore because it was necessary to calculate a large number of different variants. Therefore, we wrote a special program that was iterating through all these variants. The program is called Horus. Let's see what ambiguities require consideration of various options. For example, on the round Dendera zodiac, a two-faced wayfarer is depicted. He is a man with two heads. It may not be very visible here, but he has two faces. One face looks in one direction, and the other face looks in the opposite direction. When Brooks explored this zodiac, he said it was Venus because it is the morning and evening star. She looks in one direction, this is her morning guise, and in the other direction, this is her evening guise. Moreover, there is a hieroglyphic inscription. Here it is, next to him. Brooks found it somewhere around here. Honestly, I don't see it here, but perhaps it's nearby. Brooks read it as the morning and evening star and said, "See, the morning and evening star. This means it is Venus." But why Venus? I've already explained that the morning and evening star is either Venus or Mercury. These are inner planets that do not stray far from the Sun, so they appear either in the morning or evening. Mercury is even more of a morning and evening star than Venus because it only appears early in the morning and early in the evening, while Venus is visible for a longer duration. Moreover, the figure is male, and Venus is, after all, female. So, Brooks made a mistake here. Of course, both options should have been considered, but there is actually an explicit Venus here, two women together. Therefore, it is Mercury because there is a double female planet, Venus. Here, Mercury is depicted. Still, above the head of this two-faced male wayfarer, there is an inscription that Brooks read as the morning and evening star. But on the left, there is also Venus, also double, if not two-faced, but double, two figures side by side, and they are female. By the way, it's interesting that on Egyptian zodiacs, male and female figures are very clearly distinguished. Male figures always have a large stride, while female figures have a small stride. Therefore, it is very easy to distinguish between a male figure and a female one. Here is another common mistake among Egyptologists. This symbol is very often found in Egyptian zodiacs. It's a boat with a man standing in it, holding a staff and with a raised arm. They thought for quite a while and came up with the idea that it represents the constellation Orion, a non-zodiacal constellation. In other words, they concluded that it's some kind of Orion and started developing various theories on this subject. But in reality, it's not that difficult to understand that it's not Orion at all but a sign of the summer solstice because it is always shown next to Gemini. And not only that, you see, a bird is sitting on a perch. They make play in different ways on the fact that on this day, when the sun is in Gemini, the sun here rises highest above the horizon. Here, I present some requirements that we have put forward and satisfied in the new method. The decipherment must be proven, and the dating method must be stable. That is, with a slight change, for example, if the figure is slightly shifted, the date should not change significantly. So, additional information needs to be sought. Initially, we had a weak hope, of course, but we tried to understand whether this task was solvable at all. Is it possible to reliably and unambiguously date Egyptian zodiacs to obtain substantiated dates, rather than just arbitrary ones? It was immediately clear that two conditions were needed for this. This is additional astronomical information because without it, nothing can be said. It would be just arbitrary dates, different interpretations. And also, different zodiacs should use the same language so that it can be compared and deciphered. Otherwise, if each zodiac is made in its own way, nothing can be understood. We wrote a program that automatically calculates all solutions at a specified interval and outputs them for a given horoscope, specifically a star horoscope. Now we have also written a program for the sign horoscope. We use it too, but initially, it was for the star horoscope. It is important to understand that there are star horoscopes, which refer to ancient horoscopes when the arrangement of planets in constellations was considered. However, in the 17th century, astrological horoscopes were invented, and it was retroactively claimed to be something ancient. This is what modern astrologers engage in today, printing various astrological forecasts. People discuss them, asking, "Are you an Aries or Taurus?" This has no connection whatsoever to star zodiacs and horoscopes. In reality, this was invented in the 17th century precisely to obscure astronomical calculations and prevent the correct calculation of ancient dates. Because at that time, the people who devised the Scaligerian chronology understood that they needed to make sure they wouldn't be caught red-handed. And they were well aware that zodiacs posed a danger in this regard. Because one can easily calculate a horoscope even according to Ptolemy theory. To calculate a horoscope, you don't need any modern science, unless you're dealing with nuances, such as whether a particular star was visible or invisible in a given location. For that, modern programs are needed to calculate based on modern theory. However, to understand in which constellation a planet was located at a certain time, Ptolemy theory is sufficient. Therefore, in principle, horoscopes could still be calculated quite well in the 17th century. And they understood this. So, out of fear that horoscopes would emerge that could be dated, and the date wouldn't match, they concocted an entire theory that a horoscope is not an arrangement of planets in constellations but an arrangement of planets in astrological signs. They named the signs the same as constellations, like Aries, Taurus, Leo. But unlike constellations, which are segmented portions of the zodiac of varying sizes, they simply divided the 360-degree circle into 12 equal parts of 30 degrees each. Each uniform part was named a sign, given the same names as constellations. But most importantly, they made the reference point variable, from which these 12 signs are counted. Not like in star zodiacs, where they are just sets of stars that are fixed in place on the sphere of fixed stars. They made the reference point variable, making it the point of the vernal equinox, which itself moves quite rapidly. So, they ended up with the clock face starting to rotate. Not only did the hands go around the celestial clock, but the entire clock face began to rotate, significantly complicating all calculations. Of course, for modern computers, this is not a problem, but for the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, and even the 20th century before computers appeared, it was a problem. You have a certain zodiac, and you want to calculate a date based on it. In this zodiac, it is indicated which planets are in which signs. They said these were all signs. Planets are located in signs, but the boundaries of these signs depend on time and move quickly. To calculate the date, you need to understand when the planets were in these signs. To calculate when they were in these signs, you must already know the time in advance to determine these signs, as they themselves move. The calculations become very complicated, and the task becomes a search problem. With computer calculations, you can simply take all the dates, iterate through them, and check. Take a certain date, mark the ecliptic by signs, then calculate and verify. Then take the next date, and so on. But when you calculate with pencil and paper, it becomes practically impossible. Morozov and his colleagues spent months calculating one variant using pencil and paper even for star zodiacs. So, this method was very effective. They essentially prohibited the calculation of dates based on zodiacs, transforming them from star to astrological. Modern astrological theory dates back to the 17th century and was created solely for confusion. In reality, constellations are non-uniform, and they divide the ecliptic like this. If we enter coordinates into this ecliptic, say, from the vernal equinox point of the year 2000, there will be such degrees. Because the vernal equinox point itself, from which we measure degrees, is moving. That's why we even specify the year here, 2000. In the year 2000, it was in a certain position on the ecliptic, and degrees can be measured from it. But to break down into these images, no degrees are needed. They are just frozen images. It's just a specific set of stars. The signs are when degrees are taken from 0 to 30, Aries, from 30 to 60, Taurus, and so on. But 0 moves. That's the trick. And here, nothing moves. Let's go further. This is a table of how the sun moves today. These are completely different dates than in astrological tables. The sun is in Sagittarius on these dates, in Capricorn on these. It's not at all what you would read and see in astrological tables, where they have signs. These are significantly different things. This is how the Egyptian zodiac is structured. This is our discovery. Some date is marked in the zodiac. And here is the zodiacal scale, and a planet moves through these constellations. The first, second, third. Here are marked Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus. You see, Venus and Mercury flutter back and forth, so they make loops. Here it moves forward, then returns, then goes further, then returns, then again goes further, then returns. Horizontally, we have the zodiac circle marked, and vertically, we have time. Suppose we fix a certain time and see that Mars is in this constellation, Mercury is in this one, the Sun is in this one, and so on. We get the zodiac. We look at which planets are in which constellation at that moment in time, on the date of the zodiac. What was done in the Egyptian zodiac? There, 4 more points were taken. The points of the autumn equinox in September, the winter solstice in December, the spring equinox in March, and the summer solstice in June. During these times, they observed which planets were near the Sun. So almost always, Mercury and Venus are there, but not always. Venus may move far from the Sun, but Mercury is almost always nearby. Mars might also be present, and so might Jupiter. At the equinox and solstice points, they depicted these secondary horoscopes next to the Sun. These are not complete horoscopes, only the planets near the Sun at these 4 points. To distinguish these secondary horoscopes from the primary horoscope, they provided them with signs of transposition. These transposition signs were some kind of stand, either a snake on which it stood, more often snakes or some boats. Or simply, they were transposed outside the inner circle, that is, on the outer circle. On the outer circle, they have no transposition signs, but when inside, they are on something. If it sits in a boat, that's it, it belongs to the secondary horoscope. If it stands on a goose, that's it, it already belongs to the secondary horoscope. If it stands on a constellation, it is already part of the secondary horoscope. If it's just on nothing, inside, then it belongs to the primary horoscope. This was their symbolism. This is how they depicted horoscopes. Here is the rectangular Dendera zodiac. Constellations are colored in red, planets of the primary horoscope in yellow, and planets of the secondary horoscope in blue. They are all in boats or on stands. Here are the dates. I won't go into the details of the calculations. You have to read the books. How was it calculated? All planets were taken into account. Some were obvious. Some obviously belong to the primary horoscope, and some are unclear, whether they belong to the secondary or primary horoscope. They are depicted here, with some half in blue and half in yellow. For those where it's not obvious, half is yellow, half is blue, maybe secondary, maybe primary. All possible variants were considered, whether secondary or primary. All interpretations of the primary horoscope, all interpretations of the secondary horoscopes. Sometimes dozens of variants had to be calculated. They all were considered, and a solution was sought that would perfectly satisfy all conditions. That is, the primary horoscope had to be completely satisfied as drawn, and all secondary horoscopes had to be completely satisfied as drawn. Such a solution is called complete. For such rich zodiacs, where there is both a primary horoscope and secondary horoscopes, there is always only one complete solution. If the zodiac is poor, there can be two solutions. For example, the rectangular Dendera zodiac.
One complete solution is April 1168.
That is, there is an interpretation of the zodiac where all horoscopes, both the primary and all four secondary ones, are completely satisfied without any forced interpretations. Such a date is only one, April 22 to 26, 1168. Here are photos of this zodiac. Here is Taurus, Aries. It's not that complicated. If you want to study it in detail, you have to read the book. This is the rectangular zodiac. This is the round zodiac. Red signs are the primary zodiac. Yellow represents the planets of the primary horoscope, and blue represents the secondary horoscope. Equinox is depicted here, two equal poles in two hands. A young year. The year started in September. The year was born, and it is held in the hand. Here, in the secondary horoscope, Saturn is present. That is, next to the Sun in the autumn equinox, Saturn should be nearby. This is how everything was verified. Here is the secondary horoscope of the winter solstice in the round zodiac. Here is the constellation of Sagittarius. It is the winter solstice. You see, one planet is transposed, another is transposed as well. Here, it is Mars with a falcon head. But here, it is unclear, so you need to try different options. Here it is evident that it is the planet Venus, because it is feminine. But with this one, you need to try different options. In blue, the secondary horoscope of the summer solstice is shown in the horoscope of Athribis. It is evident that it is summer. Here is a figure with a raised arm, meaning the summer solstice. Some 5 planets are nearby. Accordingly, all options are considered. An event where 5 planets gather in a secondary horoscope does not always happen. It is a rare occurrence for all 5 planets to gather near the Sun. Therefore, all this is calculated. This is the secondary horoscope of the summer solstice in the rectangular Dendera zodiac. The secondary horoscope in Gemini also arises here. And so on. In fact, we compiled tables. Here are examples of tables showing how certain constellations are depicted. All 12 constellations, in all zodiacs. Then, how the secondary horoscope of the autumn equinox is depicted in different zodiacs. All examples. And here, in the comparison, it is very clearly seen how it is done in general. How a specific planet is depicted in all Egyptian zodiacs. We have compiled such tables, and they are in our books. It is very well visible there. In fact, when comparing different tables, different methods of depiction, In different zodiacs, the rules of symbolism are very well observed. Here are the dates of the Egyptian zodiacs. What can be seen here? The empty circles indicate where there are two options, while the solid circles where there is only one unambiguous option. This is shown by red circles. Empty circles mean there are two options. It is clear that there is a concentration in the 13th century. In the 14th century, it becomes less frequent, but there are still many in the 13th century. And then there are even later ones, but these are not large tombs. All the temples are located in the 13th, early 14th centuries. Some even reaches the beginning of the 15th century.
These are temples, royal tombs of pharaohs.
They are all here until the beginning of the 15th century. There are even some in the 19th century, but these are just regular painted coffins, not royal ones. Regarding European zodiacs, I'll provide a few examples later. They are structured differently, but the general idea is the same. They just have a different symbolism. Constellation symbolism is the same, and the planetary symbolism is generally the same, but the overall structure is a bit different, and there are no secondary horoscopes. Instead, there is different additional information. However, the overall concept is similar. Here is Egypt at the top, and Europe and Asia at the bottom. Let me show you another image of various zodiacs. Here are not all that we have dated, but many. There was an Egyptian surge. We found a lot of zodiacs in Egypt. There are many in the 13th century, and in the 14th century, they become less frequent, and then there is a gap. After this gap, there is a European surge. This indicates that this tradition somehow transferred from Egypt to Europe through some period of turmoil or difficulties when fewer zodiacs were drawn. This aligns well with our reconstruction. Here, I want to say a few words about the year 1007. There are many zodiacs with the date August 1007. They are all non-funeral. For example, the Egyptian zodiac on the Metternich stela. Then there are Mithraic zodiacs. They are different. The date 1007 is very common. All of these zodiacs are not funerary. They are found in different places, and therefore, we conclude that this is a very important date that they tried to record in different places in different zodiacs, but we do not know its meaning. I will finish with examples of European zodiacs. I'll just show you what they look like. This is one of the most important zodiacs, located in the Borgia Apartments in the Vatican. This zodiac is dedicated to the invention of Ptolemaic cosmology. One of the drawings depicts how Ptolemy invented his cosmological system.
The date is August 28, 1228.
This is a famous zodiac, slightly different from the others, with a characteristic structure. Many zodiacs imitated it. But this is the original, the very first. Then it was imitated. A similar horoscope appeared in the sky later. It was constantly noted. This zodiac is dedicated to the invention of the Ptolemaic cosmological system. And we see when it was invented, 1228, not 130, as historians say, but 1228. Here are the planets. Each planet is a wayfarer. This is a carriage. The planet is moving along. Here's the moon holding a crescent. It's clear which planet it is. The constellation is also clear, depicted nearby with a golden symbol. If I remember correctly, it's Cancer. Let's take a look. The moon holds a crescent, and here is Cancer. It's not very clear here, but there are larger photos. All the planets are depicted between two constellations. This is the invention of the Ptolemaic cosmological system, in the year 1228. European zodiacs look like this. These are one or several paintings. In this case, several.
They are beautifully depicted. People wear beautiful garments.
Here's Jupiter with thunder and lightning. He holds thunder and lightning in his hands, situated between Sagittarius and Pisces. This is the Ptolemaic cosmological system. Here is the moon in more detail. It is clearer that it's Cancer. Here's Mercury. He has the staff of Mercury. Mercury's symbolism is quite explicit. Here are Gemini and Virgo. He is between Virgo and Gemini. This is Mars in warrior attire. Capricorn and Scorpio. This is Jupiter again. This is Venus. She is a woman. There are only two female planets, the Moon and Venus. The Moon has a crescent, so this is Venus. She has the sign of Venus, Cupid standing in front. Taurus. You see, Taurus and Libra are on the left and right. This is probably the Sun, Apollo. Below, I think, is Leo. This is Saturn. Here is Capricorn and Aquarius. He is pouring water. By the way, we managed to capture this horoscope thanks to Pope Benedict. It has never been published anywhere, and we had never seen it before. We only saw it when we got to the Vatican, and we were so lucky. Generally, it is not allowed to take photos in the Vatican. It was not allowed then, and it is not allowed now. But when the previous Pope Benedict was in office, he allowed taking photos. Moreover, in any way, flash, any cameras, however you like. This was very unusual for them. But, nevertheless, the Pope said it, and they did not interfere. So, we happened to be there at that time, saw this zodiac, and were amazed. We managed to capture it, because it was not easy. The images are far away. You need a good telephoto lens and good lighting, a flash. Otherwise, you won't capture it. All of this was allowed.
We managed to take photos and date it.
This is a huge stroke of luck because it is indeed a very important zodiac. Many other zodiacs are made based on it and following its pattern. So, it happened thanks to the Pope. Now, everything is prohibited again. This is the zodiac of the Olympians, at Villa Barbaro. It is a repetition of the zodiac of astronomy. It's approximately the same horoscope. The previous zodiac of astronomy was so famous that when a similar planetary combination appeared in the sky, they would draw a corresponding new zodiac. The dating of the zodiac of the Olympians is 1700. This is another zodiac. It's also in the style of the zodiac of astronomy. In general, this one is from the 19th century, supposedly by Raphael. It's very late. In reality, zodiacs were created in Italy until the 19th century, and in some countries even until the 20th. Actually, there are still people who create similar zodiacs, recording their family events in this way. Later, they display it in a museum and claim that these are ancient paintings, supposedly from the 15th or 16th century. Apparently, it brings them pleasure when everyone thinks these are ancient paintings, but in reality, the date is from the 20th century in their family history. There are such people. So, this tradition has not died. It still exists among certain world strata of society.
Many different examples can be provided.
I'll probably end it here. Perhaps, this was a complex narrative, and I think it's better to answer any questions. Hello, Alexei.
Hello again. Good evening.
Hello.
I would like to ask a question unrelated to today's lecture topic. Is it possible?
Yes.
Since I currently live in St. Petersburg, I am interested in the history of the North and would like to ask the following question. In your opinion, whom did Peter the Great fight against in the Great Northern War? Did the Swedish king Charles XII have any relation to ethnic Swedes?
We haven't specifically delved into these questions. We have a general understanding. What goals did Peter the Great pursue in the Northern War? Regarding ethnic Swedes, was Charles XII an ethnic Swede? In general, all ruling houses in Europe were related. So, what does it mean, ethnic Swedes? Similarly, were the Romanovs ethnic Russians? They were all relatives. Don't think that Swedish kings came from a Swedish village, and English ones from an English one. It was never like that, and it is well known.
Simply studying the history of St. Petersburg, a hypothesis arises that Peter the Great, as a protege of our former Western colonies, fought against the so-called Dolgoruki. That is, Charles XII might have been a creature of the Dolgorukis. And this was essentially a civil war. Has this thought ever crossed your mind?
Within reasonable bounds, there is no definitive answer to the question you pose. This topic is indeed very interesting. Who was Peter the Great? Why did he appear? Who placed him in power? What were the purposes of the wars he waged? With what objectives? Currently, not everything is clear. We have some thoughts on this topic, but I cannot elaborate on them at the moment. It is a vast and complex subject.
Thank you.
Let me read the question that was asked at the beginning of the podcast. What is your opinion on the research of Klyasov, who claims that there was no migration of African haplogroups to Europe? On the other hand, those of the Slavic lineages were, for example, the haplogroups of Tutankhamun, as well as the Romanov dynasty, are R1b. That is, those who came from the south. Then the question was cut off.
This is Klyasov's research. Regarding his qualitative conclusions, we fully agree with them. However, we disagree with him in terms of chronology. We invited Klyasov precisely for the purpose of understanding and figuring out where he gets his chronology. How he dates when a particular haplogroup diverged. How many years passed from a certain ancient DNA to the present? In his book, he confidently claims that he can date these events. We carefully read his works and found that it's not all that simple. From a scientific point of view, there is a certain gap, a lack of completeness. We invited him to the biology faculty of Moscow State University to give a lecture on his theory with a focus on dating. So, we don't dispute his qualitative conclusions. We agree with what he says. We agree with him that the ancestral homeland of the white man is not in Africa. That the basis of Near Eastern, Indian, and other aristocracies lies in haplogroups R1a and R1b, which are most widespread in Europe. All this is correct. However, he claims that a certain number of years have passed, and all of this happened in such and such year. In his books, he writes that this is based on some theory that he came up with, and he can extract these dates from it. We tried to find out how he does it. But in the end, he had to admit that he has no independent dating, that he relies on the data of archaeologists and historians and does not intend to argue with these data. This is where our contradiction with Klyazov lies. After that, he was very upset with us. He wrote, "Tale about the lost time," claiming that he wasted his time when he was telling us all this. I don't know if it was a waste of time or not, but at least he confessed to the scientific community. It wasn't just me sitting there, many scientists were present. He had to confess. Apparently, it was unpleasant for him. For some reason, in his books, he tries to portray that he has an entirely independent dating. This is not the case. But qualitatively, what he says is entirely correct. We agree with him. So, the qualitative picture he presents is correct, but the chronology he uses, pretending that he calculated it himself, is incorrect. It's simply Scaligerian chronology.
Anton Rizhov, our regular listener and owner of a signed book, has disappeared. While Anton is connecting, I'll read a question from Oleg Pedikov. Some of your opponents refer to the datings of numerous Greek horoscopes published in Neugebauer's monograph. Have you studied them?
Our approach is as follows. As I've already mentioned and want to reiterate, calculating a zodiac for a specific date posed no difficulty in the 17th, 16th, or even 15th century because it is calculated based on Ptolemy theory. The reverse problem is more complex. If there is a zodiac, finding the date it represents is more challenging. However, if one wishes to draw a horoscope for a specific date, for a medieval scholar familiar with Ptolemy theory, it is not a problem. Therefore, astronomy books are filled with calculated zodiacs. That is, a person calculated it and wrote that a particular zodiac indicates a specific date. Indeed, it does, because he himself calculated it for that date with a certain purpose in mind. In the 17th century, when they devised the Scaligerian chronology, many such zodiacs were drawn in books. Therefore, with the rarest exception, about which I will speak separately, we never date zodiacs or horoscopes from books. We only date monumental zodiacs, those found in tombs or temples, zodiacs that appeared not as a result of desk work. Because all this chronological activity of historians is desk work. He sits in his office and writes evidence for the Scaligerian chronology. He won't go to a temple and hire stonemasons to carve out some monumental zodiac. That's a different kind of activity. To filter out such forgeries, we never dated and will never date zodiacs and horoscopes from books. The only exception we made was for the Sibley zodiac, associated with the Nativity of Christ. What did we do? We demonstrated that this zodiac has a dating corresponding to the new chronology. It has 1,000 possible datings, and it ambiguously defines the date. There are many possible datings, many dates that satisfy it. We simply noted that this zodiac, which is already astrological, might have been copied from some ancient source because it adheres to the Scaligerian chronology. Yet among the acceptable dates is the exact date of Christ's birth according to the new chronology. We pointed this out, and that's it. We don't consider it independent evidence. That's all for the written zodiacs. Note, we don't date them.
Ramil Valulan asks a question about who and how organized the observation of planetary movement. I didn't quite understand the question, but nonetheless.
This is the dawn of human science. This is how science began. We have a book called Russia and Rome, How It All Began. It presents our speculative vision of how our civilization began. Based on written sources, we see it from the time when it already had writing, chroniclers, statehood, and so on. But what was in the beginning, how it all originated? In this book, Russia and Rome, How It All Began, we present our understanding of how it all started. By the way, in this vision, there is a lot of what is considered known in history, especially in the 18th century. If you take people's understanding of history in the 18th century, their ideas are much more correct than the ideas of today's historians. That's why historians today claim that their ancestors in the 18th century misunderstood everything. Only in the 19th century, finally, historical science rose from its knees and began to understand everything correctly. But before that, in the 18th century, they misunderstood everything. Even in libraries, there are separate sections for 18th century books, in a separate hall. If you just go to the library, they will show you only books from the 19th century, and catalogs will list only 19th century books. To read an 18th century book, you have to go to a separate hall, either to the Museum of the Book at the State Library or to a special hall in the public library. There is a boundary, a barrier. The 18th century, everything is wrong, and the 19th century is already correct. This is not without reason because in the 18th century, many people still correctly remembered the past. Even the common concepts of the 18th century are absolutely correct, but today they are forgotten. In particular, the belief that the first state in the world was in Egypt. Nowadays, this is no longer considered true. Now it's in China, and it might have been in Mesopotamia. The science originated in Egypt, and the primary catalyst for the initial development of science was agriculture. They needed to predict the floods of the Nile because their agricultural cycle was directly linked to the Nile floods. They had to know this. They observed that the Nile would start to rise 2 weeks after the appearance of Sirius in a specific position in the sky. Therefore, the constellation Canis Major or Canis Minor, where Sirius is located, is considered a calendar constellation. They noticed the changing sky and, in an attempt to find a celestial pattern that could predict the Nile floods, they started practicing astronomy. This is written in the book by von der Warden, Science Awakening. We completely agree with this. It is indeed the case. Astronomy and science, in general, are consequences of agriculture. When an agricultural civilization emerges, agriculture naturally gives rise to statehood and science. Herders and gatherers need neither science nor state, but farmers need the state to protect their reserves because they are tied to them. They cannot lose their reserves and continue their activities. If they have no seeds, they cannot sow anything, cannot grow anything. Unlike herders, who, if their herd is taken away, can acquire a new one or turn to hunting. Farmers require state protection and need a calendar because the agricultural cycle is annual. They need to know in advance whether to sow or not. The most crucial question is when to sow because it may already be warm outside. Everything looks good. They will take seeds and sow them. But it turns out to be March, just warm days in March. Then a frost hits, and they don't know about it. If they don't check the calendar, it's unclear. We see how the weather fluctuates. There can already be very hot days, but due to the month being early, it's still too early to sow. They need a calendar. They must know what season it is. This is very important specifically for farmers. It is not crucial for anyone else. People were trying to feed themselves and were looking for ways, and agriculture emerged. It gives rise to the state and gives rise to science, such as astronomy. Science began with astronomy. Moreover, this was the case in Egypt, where ideal conditions for astronomical observations existed. A southern location, a view of the entire sky, very low cloud cover, and excellent visibility of stars. Even now, these ideal conditions for astronomical observations persist in Egypt.
Anton Rizhov seems unable to join us through the internet and is typing his question. Please comment on the identifications proposed in the latest book, such as the equivalence of Chronicle Slovensk and Kostroma, Chronicle Izborsk and the settlement in Moscow.
Regarding Kostroma and Slovensk, we are currently writing a book on this topic. We hope to finish it, and it will be released sometime in the summer or fall, where all the details will be provided. But how can I tell you now? It's a significant topic mentioned in the book, Russia and Rome, that you've read. However, all the specifics, which are numerous and very interesting, will be presented in the book about the beginnings of Russian history. The tale of bygone years is discussed in detail there. Where it came from, the basis on which it was written, how it was distorted, why it was distorted, how Russian history originated, where the first Russian cities were, how it all happened. All this can be unraveled, and we've unraveled it, and hopefully, the book will be out in the fall.
Slovensk and later Tver, Kostroma as well.
Alisa Shevtsova writes, I once saw an engraving where a ball was depicted instead of a cross on the dome of the church. And Diogenes Laertius believed that God is not some being but an ideal figure, i.e., a sphere. I'm interested if this is connected, thanks.
It might be connected. The Annunciation was depicted as a sphere in Egyptian images. There are familiar apostolic Christian images of the Annunciation, and there are royal Christian images of the Annunciation and the Holy Family. In the latter, divinity is depicted as a sphere, conveying divinity in the form of a sphere. The sphere was used as an ancient symbol of divinity. The sphere represents the ideal figure.
Question. I'm interested in the interpretation of the new chronology regarding the events of the Battle of the Neva by Alexander Nevsky. What was it?
The question is not simple. We wrote about the Battle of the Neva, and we did put forward a certain hypothesis about what it was, but we cannot say with absolute certainty. We have hypotheses on this topic, but we cannot say for sure.
Ivan Susanen asks a question. I am reading it expressively. In the books, it is said that Amazons were Cossack women, wives of Cossacks. On the other hand, the Trojan War is a reflection of the crusade to Jerusalem organized by Russia, in which Cossack crusaders played a key role. How would you comment on historical information that, in this war, Amazons fought on the side of Troy against the Greeks, the crusaders, and their husbands? Thank you.
Well, Amazons were generally female warriors, and they could have existed at different times. When we talk about the late Middle Ages, when Cossack troops appeared, Amazons were Cossack women. In other times, there were different kinds of Amazons. There were pure Amazons, as mentioned by Herodotus, entirely female warrior communities.
Without men at all?
Yes, without men. They even burned their left breast so that it wouldn't grow, as Herodotus writes, to make it more convenient to shoot a bow because the left breast interferes with shooting a bow. They would stretch the bowstring and shoot the bow along the chest.
So, it seems that these were different kinds of Amazons?
Certainly, they were different. There were many different tribes with various customs. One should not think that in ancient times, the world was organized like today, with very large nations. Large nations that are known today emerged in the 17th century when the empire was divided into large parts, each with its own people. It was given its own language. We see it happening before our eyes. New nations, countries, and languages emerge. As soon as a new country is formed, immediately a new language appears. We see this now. This has always been the case since the 17th century when modern nations and languages began to appear. Before that, languages had a different meaning, and peoples had a different meaning. They were tribes, each speaking their own language. There was a great diversity in customs and languages. Yes, there was a state language, but that doesn't mean everyone spoke it at home. There were different home languages and different customs. In one village, there was one custom, and in another village, there was another custom. Even in our Nizhny Novgorod region, there are villages that are 20 kilometers apart and have different customs. Of course, it's not the case now, but in the mid-20th century, there were still different customs, and there was quite a significant difference. But in the past, it was even more pronounced. So, when we talk about Amazons as female warriors, firstly, the concept changed over time, and secondly, it was diverse. There are even stories from the 17th–18th centuries about purely female warrior communities. Such communities existed in the Urals, according to the stories I've read. So, it did happen. Just large, purely female armies probably, judging by Herodotus, participated in the Trojan War. Not according to Herodotus, but according to Homer.
But, as far as I understand, for those times, large armies were a relative concept. It's not millions of people, and not even tens of thousands.
Yes, relatively. In the Middle Ages, dozens or hundreds fought in battles. Thousands were already significant battles. Tens of thousands were enormous clashes. Open a history textbook, and you'll find how the bad feudal lords oppressed the poor, miserable peasants and workers in general. How did they oppress them? In various ways, naturally. They imposed various taxes on them, and, among other things, when they fought, they trampled the fields of these peasants, and the peasants were dissatisfied. When you read these thoughts of our historians, did you ever wonder that these bad feudal lords fought among themselves? They didn't drive peasants to war. Yes, sometimes they trampled fields. That's true, but they didn't send them into battle. The idea of sending a peasant, merchant, or someone who wasn't professionally involved in military activities into battle is an idea of the 17th century.
Comrades, are there any more questions? If not, then I guess we'll end here. Thanks to everyone for participating. Gleb Vladimirovich, people here are thanking you. Many good, kind messages.
Thank you.